A piece of inside information has just leaked. Time is running out quickly for a player who was supposed to be the cornerstone of our secondary. The coaching staff's patience seems to have run out, and the next training camp has turned into a life-or-death scenario for this player's future on the team. Who is the athlete with a noose around his neck, and what is the million-dollar question he needs to answer? Hold your breath, because I will reveal this identity shortly in the video. We have prepared the definitive and relentless X-ray of our upcoming season. Let's dissect our franchise's complete game plan, from the explosive offense to our completely revamped defense fortified by true monsters newcomers. But pay close attention to the missing piece. The success of this lethal machine that the Commanders have built hinges on a single obscure tactical condition. If this specific adjustment is not made perfectly, it could simply throw the entire reconstruction in the trash. And I highly doubt that you, even as a diehard fan, have noticed what the real threat is that could sabotage our year. Leave a like on this video, it's just a click, and it helps me a lot to continue bringing more information. Quan Martin is not one of those Washington Commanders players who are just trying to be noticed when training camp starts. As a fan who follows every move, I know this is a more complex situation. This would make this conversation considerably easier. The trickiest question is whether the Commanders have waited long enough to know what they can expect from him. This doesn't mean that Martin is out of chances by any means. It also doesn't mean that Washington has made a final decision on the safety position before training camp begins. This is not the time of year to treat any unofficial player list as absolute truth, because the real definition of players does not happen on a website during the summer. It happens when the protective gear is put on, the defense begins to communicate at full speed, and the coaching staff has a clearer view of whom they can truly trust. For Martin, this is what makes training camp so crucial. He entered the league as a second-round pick in 2023, which means the Commanders did not draft him as a risky developmental bet. They invested real capital in a defensive back they believed could become a versatile and reliable piece of the secondary. There have certainly been flashes of talent consistently. There has been some production. There was enough athletic ability to understand why Washington liked him when he came out of Illinois. But at some point, the conversation needs to change clearly. Martin is entering the phase of his career where potential can no longer be the main selling point. The Commanders need more than the idea of what he could become. They need to know if he can be part of the solution for a defense that still has many questions regarding its structure considerably. Washington needs more certainty regarding safety. The safety position is one of the most interesting in the roster, as there are names there. But there are still no clear, definitive answers. Washington added Nick Cross this offseason and still has players like Martin, Will Harris, Jeremy Reeves, Percy Butler, Tyler Owens, and others competing. This gives the Commanders options, which is considerably positive. It also means that no one should arrive at training camp assuming that anything has already been decided. This is especially true considering last season's performance. The Commanders gave up 451 points in 2025, one of the worst marks in the league. This kind of number never boils down to one player or a specific position, but it puts considerable pressure on everyone involved in the middle and the defense. Free safety, strong safety, nickel, cornerback, linebacker, pass rush, everything is interconnected. When a defense gives up too many explosive plays or struggles to stop the opposing offense, the safety position becomes the natural place to investigate. Not because all failures should be corrected there, but because the function of this position is to help correct mistakes before a slip turns into 6 points. This is where Martin needs to prove he is considerably reliable. Martin has played enough for the question to change clearly. Martin's production in 2025 wasn't empty. He finished with 99 total tackles, 52 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, and 3 passes defended. This shows he was consistently near the ball. It also shows he was involved enough to make a difference. But the numbers don't completely close the discussion. The absence of interceptions draws considerable attention. And while interceptions are not the only way to assess a safety's performance, Washington needs more decisive moments from their defense. A safety can play to win without accumulating interceptions. And some of the best performances at the position go unnoticed because the quarterback decides not to throw the ball to him. Still, for a former second-round player entering his 4th season, it's fair to want more clearly. Not to mention the 15 missed tackles from last season, which left much to be desired. Martin doesn't need to become a natural interceptor overnight. He doesn't need to turn every deep pass into a spectacular play, but he needs to give the Commanders more evidence that he can change the course of a game, and not just survive it considerably. That's the difference between being a competent piece and being part of the solution. The signing of Nick Cross shouldn't be seen as a direct criticism of Martin. That would be overly simplistic, clearly, but it certainly raises the team's level. Cross offers Washington another athletic safety with starting experience, and the physicality needed to help shape the defensive style of play. He isn't here just to adorn the roster. The Commanders made this signing because they needed more competition, more versatility, and more options in the secondary. Martin's PFF score of 48.5 placed him 90th out of 98 qualified safeties in the league. Last season, a number that makes projections more difficult to make without real growth during training camp. This is considerably important for Martin. The addition of Cross could also create more opportunities for him to play as a nickelback if the Commanders opt for formations with 3 safeties, especially with Harris able to take on the free safety responsibilities. But the most important signal here is that Washington should be concerned, at least in part with Martin's development. The addition of another legitimate piece to the roster changed the conversation about Martin and made training camp a more honest environment for everyone considerably. Martin still controls a large part of this. A good performance in training camp can completely change the situation clearly. If he communicates well, limits mistakes, makes good decisions, and shows more comfort in coverage, there is still a clear path for him to become an important part of the defense. But if he doesn't stand out, Washington has players capable enough in the roster to continue seeking a better combination. That's where the considerable pressure comes from. The training center needs to provide a clearer response. The Commanders are not asking for him to be perfect or to solve all the problems of the secondary by himself. They need a little clarity, however. It would be positive to see if he can handle deeper responsibilities with more consistency, just as it would be to demonstrate that he can communicate well enough to help calm the players around him. More than anything, Washington needs to see if he can turn his athletic qualities into more reliable football when the defense is at full speed. It's not about where Martin appears in a clear roster projection. It's about where he fits when the real work begins, and whether the coaching staff sees him as a player they can build a team with, or just another defender trying to prove exactly what his role should be. For a young player, this might sound considerably harsh. For a former second-round pick entering his 4th season, it's simply the reality of the league. The Commanders have waited, and this is no longer the same front office that selected him. Martin has had time. Now he needs to make the answer clearer and easier to understand. Martin still has time, but not forever. There is still plenty to like about Martin's situation, because the door is not significantly closed. He is young enough to continue improving, experienced enough to understand what is expected of him, and talented enough to establish himself as one of the top candidates for the safety position. The Commanders cannot give up on that. Washington has many uncertainties on defense for new defensive coordinator Daronte Jones, allowing the safety position to continue being one of them until the end of the season. The Commanders need players in the secondary who bring stability. No more significant uncertainty. Martin has the draft pedigree, the experience, and the opportunity to become one of those players. But they also cannot wait forever. Now he needs to prove his worth clearly. Martin still has chances, but time is running out for the Commanders to stop questioning whether he is still part of the team's main concern at the safety position. Total characters up to now, 5,147 characters. And now, get ready for the full preview. You will discover how the Commanders' 2026 season could be crucial for the future of the franchise. At the end of the disastrous 5-12 season for the Commanders in 2025, which interrupted all the progress that Jayden Daniels and company had made the previous year, it became clear during the campaign up to the NFC Final that the team needed a makeover. After fielding the oldest roster in the NFL last year, the Commanders' mission this offseason was clear: rejuvenate, ramp up the pace, and bolster the roster. Strengthen a defense that had become a weakness by the end of 2025 and find more options for Daniels significantly. To that end, Washington traded its offensive and defensive coordinators, used its surplus salary cap space to sign a number of free agents in their 20s, including 6 potential starters on defense, led by veteran edge rusher Odafe Owe. And they assembled a draft class widely praised for its overall value. It is no exaggeration to say that the upcoming season in Washington, the 3rd year for both Daniels and head coach Dan Quinn, will be crucial in influencing the future of the franchise significantly. Daniels had a disastrous 2025, suffering a series of injuries to his right knee, right hamstring, and left elbow that limited him to just 7 games as a starter. But the problems went far beyond Daniels' health. When he was on the field, he was haunted by the inability of the defensive line to protect him, and by the severe limitations and injuries of his offensive players, some of whom, especially at the end of the season, were signed as free agents. As a result, the Commanders entered this offseason, which featured a coordinator change, with David Blau replacing Cliff Kingsbury desperately needing reinforcements for Daniels' supporting cast significantly. But first, they spent some of their precious salary cap space in the name of stability by re-signing backup quarterback Marcus Mariota and extending left tackle Laramie Tunsil's contract, finding pieces to complement wide receiver Terry McLaurin. Twice selected for the Pro Bowl, he proved to be a clearly more difficult target. The Commanders spent some money to sign tight end Chig Okonkwo and running backs Rashad White and Jerome Ford. But none of these signings had a significant impact. The signings of White and Ford, along with the return of Jackery Krosky-Merritt, Selected in the 7th round of the 2025 draft and the selection of Katrin Allen from Penn State in the 6th round of the draft, leave the Commanders with a considerable surplus of running backs. The hierarchy will be established during training camp, but Krosky Merritt, who amassed 805 yards and scored 8 touchdowns as a rookie, is clearly the starter. Antonio Williams, selected in the 3rd round of the draft from Clemson, was an interesting addition to the wide receiver group, a tough athlete with excellent route running ability, who will have a chance to compete for a starting spot in training camp. Although he primarily played as a slot receiver at Clemson, the Commanders already have Luke McCaffrey and Jalen Lane as solid options for that position, so they can add Williams to the group, along with Treylon Burks, Diami Brown, and Van Jefferson, to be the outside wide receiver opposite McLaurin considerably. However, it remains an unknown if the Commanders have a second elite option. There are similar questions about the offensive line. Tunsil, the left tackle, is an elite player, ranking 2nd in the league in pass protection, according to Pro Football Focus, but the much-needed improvements around Tunsil have never materialized clearly. The Commanders retained both starting guards, Chris Paul and Sam Cosmi, as well as second-year right tackle Josh Connerly Jr., and promoted backup center Nick Allegretti to starter after Tyler Biadasz' departure. The team, however, used a 6th-round pick to select center Matt Golban, coming from Michigan State considerably. When you finish last in the NFL in yards allowed per game at 384.3, you'll likely need to overhaul the entire unit, and that's exactly what the team did with new coordinator Durante Jones, with significant improvements at all 3 levels clearly. The most notable signing of the Commanders' offseason was the record 4-year, $96 million contract of edge rusher Oweh, which includes $68 million guaranteed generated mixed opinions. On one hand, it seemed at least on paper an exaggeration. Oweh, a 6-year pro, has an average of fewer than 7 sacks per season throughout his career, and he is not a great specialist in stopping the run considerably. On the other hand, the Commanders desperately needed a boost in pressure on the opposing quarterback, and Oweh should, at the very least, provide that clearly. Another potential improvement came from the draft, with the team using a 5th-round pick to select edge rusher Joshua Josephs from Tennessee, who can compete with the newly signed Kalavin Chason for the starting spot alongside Oweh. As for the tackles, most of the snaps should be divided among a trio of holdovers Darren Payne, Jerjan Newton, and Javon Kinlaw, in addition to veteran Tim Settle, who returned to the team as a considerably significant free agent. Linebacker Sonny Styles, selected 7th overall in the draft, should fit perfectly into Jones' scheme with its emphasis on speed and versatility, standing at 1.95 mm tall, weighing 110 kilos and boasting a wingspan of 2.06 meters. Styles is a true second-line player capable of doing virtually everything clearly. A former safety, he has the necessary speed to cover tight ends or slot receivers, besides being a considerably elite tackler. Combining this with his exemplary character, Styles should be the face of the Commanders' defense for many years. In 2026, he will lead a unit that also includes veteran Frankie Luvu, newly signed Leo Chenal, and young players Jordan Magee and Kane Medrano. The situation appears less defined in the secondary, where the Commanders used free agency to bolster the roster, signing safety Nick Cross and cornerback Amik Robertson for 2 years significantly. The former may end up being the starter as strong safety, while the latter fits well into the nickelback position clearly. But the team is also placing a lot of faith in some veterans who may or may not deserve that trust, such as 3rd-year cornerback Mike Sainristil, a player of highs and lows, with a propensity for both interceptions and big plays, and 2nd-year cornerback Trey Amos, whose promising rookie season was cut short by a leg fracture after 10 games considerably. The kicker position in Washington has been a true revolving door, with 7 kickers playing over the last 2 seasons. And there will likely be competition again during training camp. After the team signed Drew Stevens from Iowa as an undrafted free agent, he will face competition from Jake Moody, who signed a contract at the end of the 2025 season and performed well in the 6 games he played in Washington clearly. In contrast, the punter position is an example of stability, thanks to veteran Tress Way, selected to the Pro Bowl in 2025 for the 3rd time in his career, and who returns for his 13th year wearing the burgundy and gold uniform. Last year, he led the NFL with 52.8% of his punts ending within the opponent's 20-yard line considerably. The Commanders have been giving their fans a true roller coaster ride over the last 2 seasons, going from a 12-5 campaign and an NFC Championship appearance in 2024 to a 5-12 disaster in 2025. This year's edition will likely land somewhere in the middle. Keeping Daniels healthy is obviously one of the biggest factors that will determine the team's fate, but the strength of a revamped defense is also crucial considerably. If Daniels and Styles perform well, even a mediocre campaign in 2026 would represent progress and leave the franchise in a position to take the next step clearly.